Okay, welcome everyone to Tuesday, January 22nd, Selectmen meeting. We have already called the meeting to order and been in executive session. Close that executive session and now are going to begin our open session with a public hearing. And John, I think that you have.
Yes, I do.
Agenda item.
And the public hearing is regarding the acceptance of Settlers Lane as a public way. For those of you who are not familiar with Settlers Lane, it's the development that's been worked on over the last few years right off of Arbor Street, done by the Godot family, or the Godot Construction Company or Development Company. And I guess at this point, they've petitioned to have the town accepted as a public way, for the town to accept it, to maintain it and plow it and all those good things. So
We need to open them.
so
You have a motion.
so I have a motion to do this. All right, I move the Board of Selectmen open the public hearing for the purpose of considering public input on the acceptance of Settlers Lane as a public way.
I would second that motion.
Any discussion or, okay, it's open.
Yes.
Aye. Okay, seeing as nobody is here, I guess it must be pretty well accepted, and by,
No one knows.
what's that?
Or no one knows, although we do have.
No one knows,
We do
but
have a public hearing notice in our packet.
what I was going to suggest, or actually you suggested it to me earlier, that we go through the process in which brought us here today.
Sure.
So there was a notification sent out to the abutters, and I'm going to read for the public how the process proceeded. The Board of Selectmen referred to, by their vote, the proposed layout of the layout plan and description of the plan of the planning board that was completed on October 23rd, 2018. The next step was, once the board had received the planning board's report, the Board of Selectmen then must notify all abutters to the road by sending a letter at least 7 days prior to the public hearing, which has been done, where the proposed layout will be reviewed and discussed. So that's what this public hearing is all about. The Board of Selectmen meet and vote in order that the way be laid out as shown on the plan or legal description on January 22nd, 2019, and we are here today. Following the Board of Selectmen vote, the copy of their vote and the layout plan and description must be placed on file with the town clerk at least 7 days before town meeting vote to accept the layout. The next step is for the town meeting to, the town meeting must vote to accept the layout as ordered by the Board of Selectmen. And the last step is, following the town meeting vote, to accept the layout of the town, the town has 120 days in which to acquire property rights within the layout sufficient to the layout for the public way purposes. If this is not done, then the layout will not be effective. And that was sent out by our illustrious town administrator, Peter Lombardi.
So the one bit of context I'll add here, you may remember last February, the developer approached the town and was looking to bring this to town meeting.
Yes.
And we went through the timeline with town council and basically realized that we were too close to the town meeting date at that time to be able to go through each of these steps.
Yeah.
So we said it's going to be another year until we, the town's able to take this up. And the one bit of information that has changed in the past year is that the last lot on the corner of Settlers Lane and Arbor has since been developed and has their certificate of occupancy now. So the project is really fully completed, where it wouldn't have necessarily been last year.
And we'll get more details if we want them in our new business.
Yeah.
when we
Okay.
actually-
Yeah, Margaret's
So-
here to answer any questions.
Should we do that now? Could we do that now, or should we
Well-
wait until the,
We perhaps should, if, we should close the
Close the
public
hearing,
hearing, and
yeah.
then we can move that up.
okay?
On the
I have no problem with that.
Okay, so,
I mean, if somebody were to pop in at the last minute,
well, we've.
We'll be glad to
We're past the
consider it.
time that
Yeah.
we've put in here for the public meeting. It was a
Yep.
fairly short one.
Yeah.
yep.
So
Yes.
you have a motion to actually close the public
Okay,
hearing.
I do. Let's see, where'd that go now? Okay, all right. I move that the Board of Selectmen close the public hearing at this time.
I second that.
All those in favor? Aye,
Okay.
that
So
passes.
we've closed the public hearing on this, and I think we're contemplating going out of order on the agenda and moving to the new business section that has to do with Settlers Lane, which is B under new business, and it's the actual potential recommendation for town meeting to accept Settlers Lane as a public way. So if that's okay with you, you
Okay.
have that as well, John, and I think that's the reason.
Right, okay, so, let's see. Too much paperwork tonight. Okay, so we will,
If you want, I think there's a motion,
Yeah, you
the
could
next sheet in, if you
Start
wanna.
with the motion, and then we could get some discussion.
that's not it.
That's a different one.
It's section
The
B,
B.
second page in section B.
Oh, is this one that's not tabbed?
Yep, that's it.
Oh,
There we go. Okay. I move that the common convenience and necessity require the layout of Settlers Lane as a public way, and we hereby lay out Settlers Way as a town way as shown on the plan dated June 1st, 2007, and recorded with the Essex Southern District Registry of Deeds in Planning Book 423, page 84, and recommended that the acceptance of said layout to the town meeting.
I'll second that motion.
All right, so, discussion.
Discussion.
And this is really, obviously, the motion's been drafted by town council. We wanted to make sure we got it right. So I don't know if, Margaret, you want to just give any other
Yeah, if she would come up,
context?
because I do have a couple of questions I want for the
Yeah.
public.
Thank you. I'm Margaret Hoffman, the planning coordinator. Last year, Peter Gordeau, I'll say it wrong,
Yep.
Mhm.
did ask he approached the planning board to have Settlers Lane accepted. It was completed at that time to the point of, it had the top coat on, and we sent those plans out to the different departments in town. We got responses from all the departments that they were okay with that going forward. We did get a request from the Public Works Director that the storm scepter be vacuumed and inspected prior to acceptance. Mr. Gordeau has been contacted, and he's agreed to do that prior to it being accepted at town meeting.
That's the catch basin, just for everybody to know. It's a new kind of catch basin that requires vacuum maintenance as opposed to.
All right, to that point, has that been done at this point?
I don't know that it has been done yet, but I can confirm that with Mr.
If you would do that,
Gordeau.
that would be
Absolutely.
important, because I understand it's a very expensive process compared to our clamshell removal of waste or debris. Also, a question I have on that is, how many of these catch basins are there
On this particular property?
on this particular property? And that was going to be the follow-up question, are there others in town?
Bill Kayak said there was just one that he felt needed to be done. I believe there's there's two on the roadway.
Two
So-
of these
So
storm
two
drains,
catch
catch
basins,
basins?
but one that Bill feels needs to be vacuumed out before accepting the
Yeah.
road. Which is,
I
means
can confirm
before,
that with him.
Okay.
and before acceptance means before town meeting.
Yes,
Yes.
Because
yes.
that's the
Correct.
ultimate.
All right, so if you
Accepted
could
town
assure the
meeting.
board and communicate back to us,
We'll get back as soon as,
That would
I'll
be-
contact Bill on Thursday
Okay.
and get that information to Peter.
okay, and how expensive is it? I heard it was in the tune of like $800.
I don't have that information, John, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that was,
Oh, sorry.
on that email string, Bill and I went back and forth a little after, and that's what he represented to me, was that it's $800.
$800.
And we would, going forward, the town would have to have these vacuumed every 2 or 3 years.
Mhm.
So $300 or $400 a year cost to the town. These are really the only storm scepter catch basins in town now. But we expect with the new MS4 stormwater permitting requirements that there will be more to come in.
So they'd spool up together.
Any
Yeah.
project, yeah, exactly. And that $800 is, takes into account a 4-hour minimum for a contractor with a vacuum truck to come into town
One.
to do, a couple. So
Well, I've
that-
seen the trucks before
Yeah.
in Beverly and so forth.
So that cost wouldn't increase significantly as a number of other developments came online
Mhm.
with storm scepter catch basins. That
These,
require the
these,
vacuum.
this style is now required for new developments? Okay.
Starting route to 40 Merrimack Street. Head northeast on Main Street.
Where are we going, Harriet?
Just stay away from the new catch basin, that's all.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. just
I
have a-
did
a
have one
related
last side question. I've been down that road numerous times, but I can't remember how much of the curbing is granite versus not.
I don't have that information, let me look at the plan. Do you have the as-built? Did you bring the as-built tonight, Peter?
No, I didn't, did I? I don't think I included it in the packet.
No, it's not in the pack.
No.
Okay.
While you're looking, I have
I'll get that
I have a
information.
comment. Oh, go ahead.
No, I can get that information. for you.
Okay, if you would.
Yep,
All right, I do have a comment, and that is, I cannot commend highly enough how wonderful it's been to see the Gordeau family still involved. They are a wonderful Wenham family, good contractors. My family's gone back a couple of generations with them, and Peter has just been a stellar guy to work with us as hard as he has over the years to get this development in and done well, and to bring it to fruition. Just makes me feel very good and very comfortable. So next time I see him, I will
Yeah.
say something to him directly, but I want to say something publicly as well, because they are good family that have done a lot for this town.
I think it's nice to have the project fully closed out at this point, too, to
Yeah,
have it
that's-
fully
that's
developed.
nice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because there was a little
looks
gap
like a
there.
good project, he seems to do a very good job on it.
Having grown up in the construction industry and watched my father deal with developers, they're not all like the Gordeaus, let me tell you. Oh, the owner absconded to Europe with most of the funds, or the contractor disappeared, or,
Well, they live in town, that'd be a little hard,
Yeah.
even if they weren't as
oh,
family as they
I've
are.
seen a lot of different stuff.
So, just back to the process for a little,
Yep.
for a moment. If I understand it correctly, what we're doing here tonight is ensuring that what the planning board has approved, which they've already looked at, what they've approved and have said that it matches what is actually there.
Yep.
And based on that information, we will be voting to move this to town meeting.
Yes.
Yeah,
Have that
yeah,
basically right?
procedurally, the planning
Procedurally.
board, the board of selectmen in this instance put on another hat. They're the road commissioners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you're here for tonight.
Mhm.
And so.
W2 reflected that, yeah.
That's right. And so the planning board is making a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. Board of Selectmen ultimately decides whether to support moving forward with it and bring it to town meeting. And so there is in your packet the order of layout, again, from town council, that in your motion, the motion that was made,
Refers to.
that would then mean that the board tonight would be executing that order of layout and filing it with the town clerk.
So other than what has been recommended to us by the planning board, we have no other scope of authority
No.
to make this decision.
Correct.
So we have all the information we're
Yep.
going to have, we need, and it's been a positive recommendation from the planning board.
It was, yes.
And you should have that letter.
Yep,
We do.
we do.
Okay.
Yep.
We do.
Very good.
Okay,
So I guess the only question is if, John, you feel comfortable with those few questions outstanding, how many catch basins, how much granite curbing, executing the layout tonight? Is that, okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with it
Okay,
as
all
long
right.
as Margaret follows up and
I will, I'll follow up
Okay.
on
Just let-
Thursday. I'll have
just
that.
let us know that
Okay,
we're
great.
complete. Thank you. Thank you very much, Margaret.
thank you. I guess all that's left then, if we're done with discussion, is a vote.
Oh,
So, yeah, we had a motion.
Yep.
We seconded it.
Yes.
We've been talking about it.
where's that? What'd you say, B?
So all we have to do is all you need to do is call for a vote on the motion, which you have, right, Catherine?
Where is
So
it?
Yeah, you made the motion.
Oh, I already
It
did.
was already seconded.
Oh, okay, so it
But
just
we
needs to
haven't
vote.
voted.
Oh, that's right, we discussed, okay.
Yeah, because I'm
Thank you.
famous for just
All right,
moving right
um,
on and not
for-
We're
voting.
good.
Those in favor?
Aye. So it's
It passes.
unanimous by the two
Unanimous.
people. You don't really have to write too much for that. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And as I said, we went out of order with that. So we'll go back to our traditional order, which will start with announcements,
Mhm.
which I think
And
I
Catherine,
actually
that's you.
have. Yeah. So the first one has to do with town elections. Our 2019 annual town election will be held Thursday, April 11th. That's the Thursday after our town meeting. There are 12 open seats this year. Nomination papers are currently available in the town clerk's office and are due back with the signatures of at least 21 registered voters by Thursday, February 21st, 2019. Nomination papers for the regional school committee seats are available in the school district administration office at 5 School Street in Wenham. Papers should be returned there with the signatures of at least 40 registered voters from your town, either Hamilton or Wenham. The last day to withdraw from the election will be Monday, March 11th, 2019. Voters must be registered by Friday, March 15th in order to vote in the town election. Because I think these are important and people need to be encouraged to at least know what they are, I will read the seats that are available. Open seats. Board of Assessors, 1 seat for a 3-year term. Board of Health, 1 seat for a 3-year term. Board of Library Trustees, 1 seat, 3-year term. Moderator, 1 seat, 3-year term. Planning Board, 1 seat, 5-year term. Regional School Committee, 3 seats, 3-year term. Board of Selectmen, 1 seat, 3-year term. Water Commissioner, 2 seats, 3-year term. There's a 3-year term and a 1-year term. And the Wenham Housing Authority, 1 seat for a 5-year term. By reading those, it's not saying that anything about whether present incumbents are running or not running. It's just saying these are the seats that are open. So we would encourage anyone who's interested in any of those positions to
Please
see the
come
town-
on in, the water's
town
fine.
clerk.
It's not a
There's at least
scary
a couple of
place.
those positions where no one's pulled papers so
Right.
far, so that's where we want to encourage you to reach out to the town clerk, Diane Bucco, and
Yep, and if
check
you
to
have any
see what is
questions, yeah,
available.
please let
Right.
Peter know,
This
Catherine, myself,
time will go
Diane's
Fast.
superb.
February 21st for the getting the papers back. So that's the first announcement. There's only one other, and hard for me to believe that it's actually burn season. But burn season runs from Tuesday, January 15th through Wednesday, May 1st. Please visit the Wenham Fire Department at 140 Main Street or wenhamfd.org to register for your permit. If you have questions, you can contact the fire department at 978-468-5508. So we are actually in burn season, and just a reminder
And
that,
we can get the permits at our fire station,
it looks
Yes.
like you can do it
what you said?
online. You can register
You
online.
can do it online, but if you want to do it in person,
at the fire department.
Sure you can, at the
Yeah.
fire
our
department.
fire department.
Right.
Okay, because I used to go over to Hamilton all the time.
No, you can do it at our
Good.
fire
Okay.
department now.
Got it.
Okay, so the next thing we have on our agenda are reports, and we have a town administrator report, I believe. So Peter, take it away.
Yeah, so 2 very exciting bits of news to share.
You
The
like that?
first, both of which are pretty late breaking. So Patty and Jackie and I attended the Mass Municipal Association's annual meeting Friday and Saturday this past weekend. And at that event, the town received an award for our annual town report, 2017 annual town report. We were 3rd place in the small community category.
Really?
So this is something that we've been working on, has been a goal over the past several years.
Wow.
This is statewide contest.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And there's a lot of towns in Wenham, Mass.
There are a lot of
In
towns. in
Small
Wenham.
towns, small towns.
Lot of small towns.
Yeah.
Everybody has their annual report. So they look at a number of criteria, in terms of information, presentation, layout, incorporating planning elements, how practical the report is. So they've got a whole host of criteria and go through them. We've been applying for the award the past several years, and we did actually get this award many, many years ago. Last time we got it was
in the
was
archives for that.
1970,
Yeah.
as far as we can tell from our records.
Yeah.
So
That's
that was exciting. We went to the awards banquet on Saturday night and were recognized. So that was a great piece of news.
Congratulations to you and
Super.
Jackie and whoever else worked on that.
Yeah.
Nice job, Jackie. Cover, content.
whole thing.
It was really
All
based
in the
on
color photos,
yeah,
right?
it was
That was what
based
put
on
us
the-
over. That's what put us
yeah,
over the
The
top.
selectman's photo in particular, I'm sure.
I think.
Two of them in this year's too, so that could have been the
Oh,
difference.
I'm gonna have to check that out before it goes to print.
and while we're on that front, we also just earlier today got notice from the Government Finance Officers Association that our FY19 budget document was recognized with a Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. So this is a national award. We are one of only 2 Massachusetts communities with populations of less than 10,000 residents to have received the award. There's 26 local government entities, so that's not just towns. There's some, I think, sewer commissions, water districts, something that have gotten it, like Boston, Cambridge, that ilk.
yeah.
And that's a lot of, you look at the list of names of communities that receive this award, generally very large, lots of staff. So that was something, again, that we've been talking about, I think, since I got here, in terms of a standard that we were trying to meet. And really, it's great that we won this award. It's great that we won the Town Report Award. But what it means is that we're trying to get more information out to our residents. We're trying to be transparent. We're trying to really talk about the work that we're doing, as opposed to just giving them, a list of figures and people who are involved and so forth. That was the goal on both fronts. And nice that we've been able to do it to the point where it's recognized on that kind of level. But very much consistent with all of our efforts, both at the board level and the staff level over the past several years, to get to a place where, we feel like we're really trying to get information out there as best we can, whether it's on the website or any of these other channels that we have. So very exciting, and I do, as you've mentioned, I do want to recognize Jackie specifically for the just great work that she's done behind the scenes, not behind the scenes, nudging everybody along.
Yeah, not so behind the scenes.
No, but
I'm only kidding.
The girls everywhere, everything.
Yeah, well, she's persistent to get.
and I think we
Necessarily.
probably talked about these being goals coming in the door 3+ years ago, and really being a lot of the focus of her effort in that special project role. So great with all the hard work that you also then, that there's the acknowledgement of the work. And, the other thing is it's been a learning process along the way. We've asked for and gotten feedback and, refined it year to year to get to that point. And so great work by Jackie, and really all the department heads and even a lot of the boards and committees that are, being prompted and sending this information in, and understanding what we're, collectively working towards. So, thank you to them, finance office, my office, staff in town hall for, again, a lot of work behind the scenes to pull it all together.
Is this something that's spearheaded, sponsored by the Commonwealth of Mass?
So
And there's a committee that sits there with a punch list of...
two different things. So the
How does this come about?
Annual town report contest has been around probably for, more than 40
Well,
years.
at least 40 years.
Well,
Oh.
yeah,
Almost
it was the 40th anniversary of the MMA annual meeting, but they were doing this town report contest well before then.
Yeah.
So this was a statewide process
Okay.
for years and years. They have kind of a rotating cast of judges
Mhm.
that go through the annual reports. Sometimes you'll see the same names multiple years in a row. Generally, it's recently retired town managers, town administrators, longtime.
That have a good insight into...
Finance
how it
committee
should be.
members you've seen, just folks who've been involved in local government for a long time and have the context and appreciation for what to look for that jumps out
Sure.
off the page. So that's the annual report. The GFOA is a national organization. They for a number of years, I'll say a couple decades now, have had this Distinguished Budget Presentation Award in place. And it's a national program, and these are judged by peers who are recognized in the industry as really being kind of the leaders in municipal finance. And so we have to submit an application, which in and of itself, above and beyond the actual budget document, is pretty comprehensive. And then they'll go through and rate it across a whole host of different categories, and you have to, I don't want to miss it, I want to get it right. The four general areas that they're looking at is to make sure that it meets all of the proficiency standards as a policy document, a financial plan, an operations guide, and a communications device. So it's not just a budget document.
It's not just a pile of numbers.
It's a much more comprehensive picture. So
all
we
add
talk
up.
about, in our budget document now, we talk about goals accomplished last year, what we're looking forward to on the horizon for this year, what's new and different with our staffing and why. So we try to tell our story a little better than we have historically, so folks understand why the numbers are what they are.
So this is done on a national level,
And we
meaning the competition is quite big.
yeah, so there are, like I said,
But again, do they categorize it by municipal size?
Nope. No, so we're held to
Oh,
the
so
same
you're
standards as
up
Boston.
against New York City?
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
This is not broken out by a different standard for a smaller
Gee, we're not just,
community.
Wenham is not just another dot on the map somewhere.
No, and we
Jackie, you were part of the budget as well? Budget document or competition?
front and center.
This is great.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that
Great.
when I was in Newburyport was one of my primary responsibilities,
Yeah.
quite honestly, and we received the award the 3 years I was there. So I have full appreciation for the work that goes into pulling the budget document together and getting all that information and getting it, again, up to the standard that checks all the boxes for GFOA.
Well, thank you too, Peter.
And to your point, Peter, not to in any way diminish the work that Jackie has done, but we're recognizing you and Jackie clearly as leaders in this, but I think you're right in saying that it had to be a team effort.
Yeah.
The two of you alone could not have achieved this. So thank you for your efforts, but to everyone else in Town Hall that had to have been a participant.
In their own little slice or proofreading or,
Someone I think that I definitely want to mention really briefly.
Yeah, sure.
All of the interns that have been in my office since 2016. That's when I started formally having an internship in the permitting office, working on special projects and permitting work.
Very good.
Every single intern that's come through this building that's worked with me has done a part of this document, has done some sort of research, has done some kind of proofreading, making sure, you know, whether it's they were a student who is not a budget-focused person, and I was using them to make sure it was user-friendly, or someone who did have financial knowledge who was helping us to strengthen, you know, a priority here, a priority there. I couldn't have done anything that I did without the department heads or without that intern staff support. So I actually cannot wait to send an email to our many interns, particularly most from Gordon College, some from a couple other institutions, because this, you know, the layers of this over the years would not have happened without those wonderful interns that we've had.
Great.
Wow.
Hopefully this will entice even more interns.
Next one starts tomorrow morning.
Love that. I have to remember to come by and say hi.
But on that front, that's really been something that we've been able to build some capacity in town hall without costing the town. I won't say anything, because it you know, managing an intern and making sure that it's a worthwhile experience for that individual is a commitment unto itself, but no monetary cost. You know, having those interns, and how many have we had now? Are we going on our 7th?
This will be the 7th.
Yep. Really has helped, and we've had one consistently, pretty consistently year-round for the past 2+ years.
You may have thought of this, but if you haven't, would you also send a copy of what you're doing to the interns to the President Linsky of the college, so that he's aware that his folks have been here doing a lot of good stuff with you?
I tend to send kudos towards Dr. Brink in the political science department, because he runs the internship program. But I'm happy to share it. I plan to share it, especially too with Rick Sweeney, who we communicate with a lot about this particular piece. I'd be happy to share it with Rick, because I think he'd be the right person to.
Whose son was our first intern.
Right.
Who now has a career in municipal government.
Rick is a great guy.
It was at the MMA conference this weekend.
All right, just as long as the president does see it eventually, that's,
I didn't share it.
because they're a big population for us, and they do a lot of behind-the-scenes help and work for.
Yeah, and to be honest, we've tried interns, and we've had at least one intern who wasn't from Gordon, I think.
Yep.
But generally, you know, we've tried to work with other area universities, and we've had by far the most success with the Gordon interns.
I don't even have to recruit anymore. I, for a long time, was doing a posting with their career services, but now I have my former interns recruiting for me, and I have the different professors in the political science department, which is a real compliment to their experience here, I think, in that they're sending more folks in this direction. And I think it's a compliment to both mine and Peter's alma mater at Suffolk, because they had a huge commitment towards internships that were profitable and thoughtful and mindful of the fact that we are, you know, taking up people's time, and we want to be giving them things that they can use to grow and learn, and that just adds more capacity for us. So I think that's really where that program came from, and I would say 100% I don't think we would have either of these projects as great as we have them without the support of those folks, because they do a lot of proofreading and a lot of double checking, and helping with, you know, being second, third, fourth sets of eyes. So very appreciative to all of them.
Oh, editing is a very, very important job.
That's my favorite job.
Fully, yes, your
Loved
favorite
it.
job.
Anytime.
Because you want to get it
I
right.
suppose you said it too loud. Okay. Do you have anything else, Peter?
Thank you.
Not that that isn't
Congratulations.
enough.
No?
I have no report. Do you have anything further under reports, John?
No, I don't. Thank
Okay.
you for asking.
Then we will move on to the consent agenda, which again, John, you have, and I think it's a pretty simple motion this time. Includes just minutes.
Yes, okay.
Motion is right at
Just-
the, your motion should be
So-
right there. This is like a very
Oh, it's
short, you
first.
can almost
Right.
miss it.
Okay. Okay. I move to approve all items on the consent agenda as presented.
I would second that motion.
And that consists of 2 open session meeting minutes.
Okay.
You second, you said?
I did.
Okay, any discussion, question? All those in favor? Aye. That passes unanimous.
Done.
In case you missed that one, Catherine.
Okay, so item B, the first item on our new business, we have already talked about. That was the Settlers Lane.
Yep.
We will move on to C, which is review and potential approval of local action, another one of these titles, unit application to the Department of Housing and Community Development for unit at Spring Hill. And we, once again, have Margaret here to talk to us about that a little bit. Maybe, if you don't mind, coming up and explaining what that is and what we're being asked to do.
Margaret Hoffman, again, town planning coordinator. You're probably familiar with the Spring Hill subdivision that's currently being developed. Part of their decision with the planning board back in
Gosh, it was a long time ago.
2000, it was recorded in 2017, I believe, but it was 2014 was when they were they came in with their plan. So this was originally an 18-lot subdivision, and part of the process the planning board worked through with them was to they agreed to create some affordable units within the subdivision. One of the units was to be 89 Dodgers Row, which is the current smaller house on Dodgers Row. That's part of the property that was owned by that's owned by the developer. The other, their decision, in the decision, they agreed to 2 or hopefully 3 units of affordable housing. And so they've gone through the process, and now they're starting to create the market rate units. There's the 1 unit on Dodgers Road that they're renovating and getting ready to put on the market as an affordable unit. That's the document that you have in front of you that they're requesting signatures on. Part of the process for it to be accepted as a local action unit is to have the recommendation from the selectmen. So, as far as we know at this point, that's the only unit that's definite that's going to be an affordable unit. They've agreed to, from the conversations I've had with them, they've agreed to donate lot 17 to Habitat for Humanity. We don't know at this time what Habitat intends completely to do on that. We don't have any applications before us. The discussion has been that there may be a 2-unit building on that lot. But
So the potential is for 2 more.
yeah, so
2
potentially
additional.
we
Right,
would
but
get
it's-
3 affordable units.
So if Habitat, for some reason it doesn't work out with Habitat, there's still a requirement for Spring Hill to
There is
produce 1 additional.
at least 1 additional,
So
yes.
I have 2 different addresses here, 81 and 89, but, so it's
There's,
8.
Yeah.
I think 81 is,
83.
is 83 the top of the hill?
83 is the remodel.
Is the one they're remodeling.
One on
To
Dodgers
be
Road.
an affordable
83, okay, so 83 Dodgers Row is the one on Dodgers Row. There's another building at the top that was, I think, 79
It's
Dodgers
now an
Row.
Angus.
That's now, yep, on Angus Circle. They're renovating that, but that will be a market rate.
Okay.
And then there was another one that was at the bottom of the hill that was torn down.
77.
All right, so it's 83 that, right now,
Correct.
they're looking for,
83
they're
Dodgers
applying to
Row.
the DHCD for. Does the planning board decision stipulate by when that
No,
unit is meant to be ready?
No,
No.
they did not give them a time frame. It wasn't as concise as some other
Mm.
decisions we've done in recent past.
But certainly has to happen before they get their final certificate of occupancy, I presume. And it sounds like they've already begun the renovations? No.
I think they've almost completed the renovations on 83, they
We
haven't?
do not have a building permit.
Oh, they didn't get a permit yet.
And
they
ask for a permit?
have not put in an application. 79, which is the remodel of the house in the back, the manor house, for lack of a better
Mhm.
term, that's a market rate, is almost complete with renovations.
almost
But
complete.
83, they've not pulled any building permits for at this time.
But it looks like what we have here, it's not completely clear to me, that doesn't completely seem filled out. But what we're being asked to approve is their local action unit application to the DHCD, which would probably be their first step.
Right.
Right.
And it would mean that it would be eligible on our SHI.
Right. Which
Eventually.
I hope is one of the conditions for the planning board, that any affordable unit that we build is eligible for the SHI.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
We'll be on the.
Okay.
One of the, it says in their decision, the original decision, it said the affordable home should be administered by the town of Wenham Affordable Housing Trust or such other organization agreeable to that trust. When I spoke to Jeff Kruger, he suggested that Harbor Light would be the organization that would manage that property and the rental of it.
That's something that the Affordable Housing
Confirm.
Trust would have to
Take up.
approve.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Which Shine Harbor Light manages the
They
other
manage the Frankfurt property.
Affordable Housing Trust
Yeah,
property.
Okay, so that's yet to come before the Affordable Housing Trust
Yeah.
request,
Yep.
or just mentioning.
Yeah, and this is
So
really.
this is the local action unit application. It's, from what I recall, similar to the, if not the same, as the application that Habitat had to put in for their project. It doesn't appear, and I'm sorry, this is probably obtuse of me, but at least when you get to page 4 of this document, it doesn't appear to be filled in. So, and yet there's a regulatory agreement which seems to
Yeah, which is very clear in terms of.
which also has some blanks, but some blanks on purpose. So I guess,
Have in front of you?
yeah.
Where are the blanks? in
Well,
there?
so the very first page of it, I guess dates,
Oh,
that's not
yeah,
important.
that always leave that out.
The second part, the project sponsor intends to construct a housing development known as.
Yep.
They're not hard things. Permit is recorded at, and then I think the rest of it is,
The rest of that is
filled-
completed.
is
It's just not
filled
the
in.
first page yet.
right. And then the document before that, which I think we have in our books, that starts on page 1, I guess. Which is the actual local initiative program application, which is the one that we're meant to sign, needs to have a correction on the address. But also, that's the one where, under the project on page 4, there doesn't seem to be any information. Calls for developer name, address, phone, email,
Okay.
the number of units, right.
That's here.
So I think, if I'm correct, I'll make sure I'm correct before I say something. The motion will be for authorizing me to, on behalf of the select board, to execute this application, and
Right.
acknowledging that there are some things that need to be filled in. I'm willing, if you're willing, to.
You are
make
willing.
that
Oh,
signature contingent upon the finalization of the
Getting that.
document.
Okay. I'm more than pleased to have that happen.
So that's why I didn't make the motion at the very beginning. Contingent, I guess. This motion that I'm going to make, I'm adding contingent to finalization of attached documents? Not finalization, completion.
Completion, yeah, right.
So this motion, for discussion, I think, to make sure I've got it right, would say, I move, this is a little strange to move to authorize myself, but
I was going to
moved
ask if you wanted me to
Well,
do
it's
that, but
got
that's
my
okay.
name on it,
It's
so I started
okay.
reading it.
I have no problem with
vote
it.
to authorize Catherine A. Harrison on behalf of the Select Board to execute the local action unit application to the Department of Housing and Community Development for a unit in the Spring Hill subdivision contingent on completion of the attached documents.
I would second that motion, now that I've known Catherine Harrison for the last hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah, I'll make sure.
Just
So,
teasing, not part of the
under
motion.
Discussion, was there anything that I asked about that seems like it will be a difficult thing to
No.
attain? So it's all just
No.
perfunctory.
It's information we can obtain.
Okay.
Okay, do you have any other,
No.
any discussion on that?
I'm all set.
Okay. I would ask that we continue to be updated on what's happening with the second committed unit and potentially the third, but since it was 2 or 3, we need at least 2. So if you
Yes.
keep
Yeah,
us
we'll keep you posted
updated on that.
as we get information.
Okay. All right. If there's no other discussion, we have a motion. Did you get the end of that? Okay. We've had some discussion. Are we ready to vote?
I am.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous.
Thank you. Hey, Margaret, while you're still here, if I could ask yourself and Peter, when it's appropriate, could we get an update on the Pines as to where that's at?
The project itself?
Yes,
Yeah.
as a whole project status.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on it briefly tonight, or do you want to wait?
It's up to you. I didn't ask you to do it tonight, but
What kind of information would you like?
Well, yeah, and Jackie's here too, to talk about what's been permitted. I mean, that's,
I can go through the.
because I've driven up a number of times, and there's progress going on up there.
Quite a bit of progress, the road's been put in and, sorry.
I'm just wondering,
Yep.
since we don't have this on the agenda,
Sure.
that there
Yeah.
may be, I know that there are other people in town who are very interested to hear this report. So not that I would wish to have people come back for a second meeting, but I would like people to know that we're going to get this update, because, as I
Yeah.
said, people are really interested.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of
I
questions
get
going
more
on.
requests about that than pretty much anything else in town these days.
I'll put together a report for your next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's
Thank
it.
you.
Good. Appreciate it.
Good question, though. Okay, on our agenda, we have no other matters under new business. We begin with old business, and the first item on old business is one-day liquor license request. And John, you have that.
Okay. I trust we have a check to back up the liquor license request, Peter?
We do. We've received the $12,000 check for the prior past 2 years' use of the iron rail fields by the Academy of Penguin Hall. Yes.
All right. And all the other documentation looks like it's in place, and they're in good standings. So I would move that the Board of Selectmen approve a one-day liquor license, all alcohol beverages, liquor license for Molly Martin's for the Essex County Community Foundation's Membership Council. Say that 3 times fast.
Meeting.
Meeting to be held at the Academy at Penguin Hall, which is at 36 Essex Street, on Monday, January 28th, 2019, from 4 p.m. to 8:30 p.m.
I'll second that motion.
Any further questions or discussion?
Not for me. I'm happy that we were able to move forward.
Yes, right. It was a little stagnation last week, but we're all set.
Okay.
Okay, those in favor? Aye. That passes
Approved.
unanimous.
Oh, and now we come to I've lost track now, part 3, maybe, of our review of warrant articles. Clearly, Patty's got that TV on in her office, hopefully on mute.
She just ghosts in.
It can't even be on mute because you have to hear where we are. That is my agenda item, which I'm going to very quickly turn over to Peter/Patty, or whoever else has any information. Maybe Margaret for bylaws, I don't know.
Oh yeah, Margaret will be here for zoning bylaws.
Yeah.
We're not taking those up on our own.
Yeah.
So do you want me to go through?
please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have included in your packet, there is an updated, again, preliminary listing of warrant articles
Mhm.
for town meeting coming up. They are now numbered at 31, so I'm guessing we're gonna be having a discussion probably tonight and probably again in subsequent meetings about what is a priority to remain as a warrant article and what potentially could wait, isn't in need of imminent fixing or addressing this year as opposed to next. So full appreciation for that fact, and I think the number's actually grown since we last had
Yes,
this
I think it
conversation
has.
last week. And so we'll talk a little bit on your listing, or on the updated listing that's in your packets. There are 3 new warrant articles that are in bold since we last discussed this, and there are also some new zoning bylaws above and beyond what were on the original list. Although the one related to stormwater.
Are you
which
talking about bold like this
bold
here?
like that, yeah, you got it. I tried to make the font bigger and more spacing for you, John.
Is,
Thank you.
is 28
You remembered. Thank
not
you.
also, has that been on our list? The ground-mounted solar photo?
No, that's,
voltaic?
yeah,
That's a new one?
well, not necessarily new to the general planning board discussion, but new that we think it's ripe for discussion for this.
So it's, I guess I mean to say new on our list.
Yes.
So it should actually be bolded as
Yep.
well. So
Yep.
there are 4.
Yep.
Okay.
So, in the interest of trying to balance out agendas, we've taken up a number of, outside of the budget-related articles, we've taken up a number of these on the agenda tonight, plan to discuss several others at the next selectmen's meeting, which is February 12th, we're meeting on the 5th, but with Hamilton and the schools.
Oh, right.
So this is kind of part 1 of 2 parts, going through in some detail on each of these warrant articles, and questions, feedback, more information requests, support or not, or whatever, so we can kind of try to move forward. So the first one on tonight's list, and this is
If
a
I could
new
ask
one.
you,
Yep.
I see one that's bolded, it's number 5,
Yep.
18,
16.
oh, 16, okay.
And
okay.
28.
All right, I got it now. Thank you.
Okay, so the first one is what, for now, I'll refer to as Article 5. And that is something that came out of our discussion last week around the FY20 budget and the constraints that we're working within, and understanding how we would want to structure an operating override warrant article or warrant articles, and trying to think a little bit outside of the box. So there is an option that the town could take up, which is a special purpose stabilization fund. And there's really a fair amount of flexibility in how these are structured and what they can be used for. So in this particular instance, just my initial thought was, we have readily acknowledged over the past several years that the major budget driver above and beyond everything else on the town or school side has been the enrollment shift and the cost implications of that. It's just a bill that we have to pay. We don't have any discretion on that. We don't, there's no fault to be had. It's just based on the 3-year, going back to our assessment in the regional agreement, 3-year rolling average of student enrollment. much discussed about. I did include one of the slides from an earlier budget presentation, just looking at the year-over-year cost impact of the enrollment shift over the past several fiscal years. And the bottom line there, and actually, I should say that that last bar graph, excuse me, for FY20, was assuming a 3% net operating expense increase on the school side. So it was, this was when we were earlier on the budget process, so it had the impact at $162,000. It's actually $177,000.
Oh,
The
yeah.
cost of the enrollment shift right now, you know, based on the current school budget for FY20. So across the past 5 fiscal years, it's just short of $1.4 million in costs that we've had to absorb on the town side and with under the levy limit to fund the cost of the shift. So the idea
You said
behind
1.4?
$1.4 million. It's been, frankly, FY20 would be the lowest it's been in over 5 years.
Right.
It's, you know, the past 3 fiscal years in particular, it's been plus or minus $300,000.
Right.
You know, generally speaking, our new levy capacity with new growth and state aid and everything else is, you know, on the order of between $400,000 and $500,000. I mean, there are certainly exceptions to that. Ambulance coming online this year increased that more significantly than that, but generally year over year. So it's eating up more than half of our new levy capacity just off the top has been the enrollment shift.
And projected to remain fairly stable over the next.
It is now, we think,
Stable at, you know, almost $200,000. I mean, stable but high,
stable but high.
but
was
not
gonna say,
projected to, you
It's,
know, ramp up.
it isn't at this point.
Yeah.
It's not going
Um,
to continue climbing.
Right,
But, you know, it's a projection.
right. So, this particular kind of stabilization fund, obviously, it's called the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund. It's earmarked for a particular purpose. So it can be used to, you know, fund capital, or, you know, that's what it's used in a lot of places. For some communities that go through kind of a cyclical budgetary process where they know out on the horizon that they're going to need an operating override 5, 8, 10 years out, and you know, these are larger communities I'm talking about, they'll sometimes put funding aside for that, knowing that that's coming, to mitigate against it, to be able to fill that hole once it gets there. But for our purposes, my recommendation would be, at least for discussion, to create this account for the student enrollment shift. And what's a little unique about how this particular stabilization fund works is it requires going to town meeting initially, 2/3 vote. But then it's not a permanent increase to our levy limit, and we don't have to fund it at the same level every year, and we can skip years if we don't need it.
0 to $1 million or something, just a big number,
Correct. We don't have to fund it
consistently.
at the same amount. We're not as locked in as you would be in a lot of most other scenarios.
A little bit
So-
of planned savings. I get the concept.
Well, and it's also a way to, in terms of explaining it to town meeting and explaining it to the residents, to say that this is a fixed cost that isn't necessarily, you know, a town or school cost, but a fixed cost that we have to accommodate that's been taking up all this other capacity to the point where we're not able to provide level services within a levy limit budget. And the school has to go for an operating override as well.
So you give it a very clear definition. In other words, it's earmarked for this purpose and not general funds or
it would be applied to the cost of the enrollment shift.
And only the cost of
And
enrollment.
that-
So the title is a little bit broader than.
Because that's typically what irritates people about government. They say, oh, yeah,
Sure.
we're going to do this to reduce the
And I-
bridge cost or
yeah.
whatever, and that never ends up happening, and
And this is entirely conceptual at this point. I thought it would just be good to have the conversation, much like we've had the past couple meetings about what's the board willing to consider
Yep.
as we move forward. And we would certainly be working with town council and bond council and DOR to really get into the details of it. But we didn't want to do all of that work if the board said, you know, we don't support it for whatever reasons, or we have these concerns.
So, from a funding point of view, though, the town would still have to contribute to the stabilization fund an amount equivalent to what we expect the enrollment shift to be, and I'm guessing the idea is to sort of get ahead of it a little bit.
We could get ahead of it, or we could go year to year. So for next year, for instance, the initial appropriation could be for the $177,000 that we know is going to be our enrollment shift cost for FY20. And we could have an operating override just for that amount that would be applied for that purpose.
An operating override for that amount, but that's an amount that we will owe regardless of whether or not the override passes, if it's an override,
Correct.
right?
But
So
it would create additional capacity within our levy limit if we were funding that with an operating override as opposed to within our levy limit budget.
But-
Right now,
Right,
and that's the one thing, you know, as we talked about the schools, the extent to which we can fund the school assessment for FY20 with a levy limit budget, level services on the town side. It's a 1.4% operating expense increase for the schools. Right now, they're at a 6.2%. And the enrollment shift. That's what we've included on the school side for FY20 budget line in Article 1.
so I guess, I think it's a great concept, but where I'm getting a little stuck is to take money that is, as you said, and as correctly, a fixed cost and not at our discretion or the school's discretion, a bill will come, we have to pay it, and to put that kind of a fixed cost on an override that's subject to, you know, a town vote, and if it doesn't pass, we're gonna have to find $177,000 somewhere in the rest of our budget after town meeting, unless I'm not understanding that.
Yeah, and I think we would have to, my understanding of it is that we would have to include sufficient funding or have the ability to include sufficient funding in the school operating override if this were to fail.
In the school operating override.
so there's no, okay, I was just thinking, why isn't this giving the schools a license to come and hit us harder on
I think,
monies, but-
I'm actually not looking at it that way at all. I
Right.
think there's,
See
I
that.
think there's a
the
100.
numbers of students from Wenham is the number of students from Wenham.
Right. Quite honestly, I would say, we know that there's about $180,000 of potential needs in terms of services that the town's gonna provide for next
Yeah.
year, that none of which are included right now in the FY20 budget. And there's about $180,000 in capital needs that is not included in our operating budget and cannot be paid for with free cash.
Right.
So my suggestion would be that if we were to create this, that some element of those two needs would then be included in the Article 1 levy limit budget on the town side.
So how, and this may be different in years out, but in this year, how is this stabilization fund different from us having a simple article that calls for $177,000 override for the purposes of the school budget?
not permanent.
Right, because it's not permanent.
So it's 1 year.
It's just to, right.
Again, I guess,
In other words,
is
it's
there-
year by year.
Right.
Year by year.
Right.
So if you do the override this year for this special purpose, you haven't raised your levy limit for the next year, which arguably you could use for anything.
Right.
So you're really
Right.
making a commitment
So,
towards
You're s-
funding this school enrollment shift while,
Yeah.
you know, basically I look at it as like the commitment that we have is the commitment that we have. So what kind of funding mechanism can we use where we may have some ability to do other things while, you know, telling people that we're doing this override for this specific purpose only. Oh, and by the way, if we do it again next year, it'll be for this specific purpose only. We won't be using this increase for something else next year in the taxing capacity. If
So,
I'm-
I understand.
And, you know, obviously, student enrollment is agnostic, right? I mean, there's no, it's
Right.
a,
But not necessarily compelling. I mean, I guess my only,
Yeah.
what I only would want to see is if there's a way to mitigate the risk of this failing at town meeting or at a ballot, and then we have to come up with $177,000 of things that we've already put in our Article 1 budget.
right, and we would certainly want to make sure that it was structured that way, that we didn't end up, that
Yeah.
we had
Yep.
played out the scenarios enough, and we were prepared to be able to both have the appropriate amount, even if it's an amendment to the article, the school operating override article at town meeting, and then work with council on the wording for the ballot measure as well.
So-
Because this creating and funding this stabilization fund, my understanding is that it just requires town meeting approval. It does not require going to the ballot, but that's, again, something we'd have
okay.
to double check.
So also, I guess it would need, in my mind, to be separate and distinct from any school override.
Correct, yes,
Right.
calling it
So
out,
it's a separate article,
that's,
and
yeah, that's,
maybe
and
it
that's how we have
says,
it.
if this does not pass, something, you know, and the contingency
It's a separate
goes back
bookkeeping
into the-
entry that stays there for,
It can be,
possibly 1
it's going to
year.
be paid for one way or another, it could be paid
Yeah.
for sort of a 1-year operating override, or it can be in the budget, and we'd have to have both scenarios available, because thankfully, if it's not a ballot, then we'll know right at town meeting.
Right.
Okay, I understand. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, but I understand. I think it's an interesting concept.
So do we think it's worth spending a little time with town council and understanding some of the nuances of
Yes.
how we would be able to navigate that process?
yeah.
I think if we can
Yep.
mitigate the risk I talked about,
Yep.
it's definitely worth a little more
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, and if you have something like that, when Jack is back, be good to get his 2 cents on it, unless you've already had the conversation with him.
Yeah, I haven't talked to him about
Right.
that. This, I think, was something I kind of had floated out there in the past week. And so was a new concept entirely. Again, that just I thought merited some discussion before we spent.
It's a little hard to, I think we need, to your point, we need to hear about all of them in some level, and for me anyway, and then it's easier to, you have a gut feeling about whether you want to support something or not, or put it forward, but it also has to do with what else is going on. So it's really not going to be till we've heard at least something about all of them. That, at least on this one, I'd say, no, we don't have time, or it's not important, or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's
It does
why,
rise to the, yeah,
for
it's
this,
important.
it's about our budget funding, you know,
Right.
what we're gonna be able
Right.
to provide in terms of
Right.
staffing and services and
Right.
funding capital, so, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a
It's very
non-starter out of the
interest-
gate.
It's a very interesting initiative.
No, it's an
I-
interesting
I
thing, we
like
should,
it.
need to think
Yeah, I
about
like the
out of the,
concept.
I hate the phrase out of the box, but we do in these
Trying
times
to be creative.
have to be creative, I think.
And we have, in some way, I mean, it's out of the box certainly in terms of the mechanism and all that, but we have consistently, over the past 3-4 years, in going through our budget process, called out the cost of the enrollment
Mhm.
Yes.
shift separately and acknowledged
Yep.
that is.
You have been
just-
very good at that, and I do not forget your numbers when you do that. For some reason, there's a lock-in for my head. and
Yeah, but I think, you know, we've done that intentionally.
Hmm.
And so to the extent that folks have been listening, you know, there may be some context for, you know, what that overall issue is. Okay. The next one is Article
16?
13.
Okay. Oops, I skipped
Which is, and again, we touched on these very briefly
Right. I
um,
thought we
when
talked
we
about this
went
one.
over this first list. And it's just by way of, I think the idea here is the board supportive or not? Are there any additional questions we need to follow up on?
And what's the potential financial impact of it,
Yeah, so,
approximately?
This is veterans tax work.
Yeah, so this is to increase yeah, exactly. To increase the maximum abatement amount for the Veterans Tax Workoff Program, we adopted the local option that created this still relatively new Veterans Tax Workoff Program a couple years ago.
Yeah, it's a good program.
Yeah, at the time, so it basically mirrors our senior tax work-off program at the time. The maximum abatement amount statutorily was $1,000. They have since increased the senior tax work-off program maximum amount to $1,500, which we adopted last year. Last year. And now there has since been legislation over this past summer, the BRAVE Act, which increased the maximum abatement amount for the Veterans Work-Off Program up to the same $1,500. So we currently have one veteran here in town who's taking advantage of the program. We're looking at, we know that at least one other veteran would actually shift over from the senior tax work-off to the Veterans Program.
Oh,
not
so
an increase in cost,
it really
just
wouldn't
a-
change
So
the,
Right.
Yeah, it would increase the cost.
It
The
would not-
board,
It would not, it would increase the cost in this category, but it
no,
wouldn't
it's a net
really.
wash, wouldn't it be?
It would just shift from being the senior work-off
Right.
program to the veterans work-off program.
Right.
and adding an
And
extra
adding the $500.
So yeah, stepping back, big picture, the board adopted a policy back when we really sought to ramp up the senior tax work-off program that said, when we increased it actually to the $1,500, because I think there was, you know, some recognition there that now we're talking about a significant impact on the overlay. So, because that's where this is funded from, is in the overlay. So, which has been set for the past many years now at $135,000 a year. So, what the board's policy says is up to $15,000 for the senior tax work-off program. So, what that means is that if we have 10 people and they all maximize their abatement amount, then that's the cap, that's the ceiling, and that's generally what we've seen.
Yeah.
Since then, we adopted the Veterans Workoff Program. Again, very limited participation so far. There's no policy on that per se in terms of a cap on how many veterans we would take on. One thing that we've talked about is there are some folks who are interested in the senior tax work-off program that, you know, because the people who've been doing it now for the past several years want to stay on. They haven't been able, these, you know, new residents haven't been able to get into the mix and get involved and take advantage of the program. So I think what we'd be looking to do broadly outside of increasing this amount for the Veterans Program is to increase the cap up from $15,000 to $20,000 for starting next fiscal year. So that way we'd add a little capacity in terms of the need for those few seniors who've expressed an interest in joining.
That's for the senior tax work-off program, 15 to 20,000, 15 to 20 people.
Yep.
And the same, but no cap, you said, for this.
And it may be something where, you know, we cap this at 5 or something. I don't anticipate that many to come in. It's one of those things where the board really has you know, this isn't something that requires going to town meeting. This is a policy we can set internally. So if we see all of a sudden a great demand for veterans, I think maybe we want to revisit it, but I don't know that we necessarily need a cap at this point. I mean, it would be a good problem to have if all of a sudden, you know, we had more than just a
We have it,
couple
it's,
veterans.
it's well intended, and I assume well received by those who would need to or want to.
And we've talked to the Veterans Committee about trying to get the word out about
Yeah.
not just this program, but generally the benefits available to Wenham residents at the local and the state level. And I know that's something that they've been working on, so.
Well, our veterans and our seniors are often identified as our two of our most vulnerable populations. And I think anything that we can do as a
And-
town, communally,
Some of
To
our
help.
most supportive
Yeah.
people.
I think it should at least go before the townspeople and
Yep.
have them.
Okay.
Okay.
weigh in.
So
That's
staying
the-
on, and I think,
for
you
me
know, just
anyway.
kind of procedurally, just leave it on for now, and then once we get into February, we'll talk about a final list of what
Mhm.
stays and what doesn't,
Yeah.
and then votes on recommendations and all that sort.
But knowing full well, there may be a couple that come off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just always want to reserve that.
The next one is the adoption of Chapter 40, Section 13D, which is the Compensated Absences Reserve Fund.
We talked about that.
Yeah, we did touch on this briefly. Basically, this is to create a separate reserve fund for obligations that the town has to pay employees for sick leave buyout in particular upon retirement. And for this current fiscal year and then looking out on FY20, we have two pretty significant retirements, both from the library. The total payout owed between those two employees in the two fiscal years is $45,000. So they have, they are non-union employees, and there is nothing in the handbook or in their employment agreement, in one case, that says when they would be paid out these benefits. In the union contracts, there is now, as of the most recent contracts, provision that says unless the town receives notice by December 1 of the previous fiscal year of your impending retirement the next fiscal year, we will make every attempt to pay out sick leave owed in that fiscal year that you retire, but we aren't obligated because we haven't budgeted for it, basically, so that we have a little bit of an ability to fund it in the budget. Not the case for these two employees. So what's going to end up happening is they have both agreed of their own accord for half of their buyback owed to be paid out in 19 and the other half in FY20. And so we're going to, that's going to mean that we will need a reserve fund transfer for a little over $22,000 for FY20, or I'm sorry, 19.
19.
And then budgeting for it in FY20. The one caveat I'll give there, though, is that because they're both library employees, Hamilton ultimately, as we go
Takes
through the
2/3 of
reconciliation
that.
process, will cover about 2/3 of those costs.
Yeah.
So the $45,000, Wenham's actual obligation at the end of the day is going to be around $15,000.
Okay.
So is it, looking out into the future,
Yeah.
big enough money to go through the exercise of establishing a reserve fund for this purpose?
Yeah, so there are other planned retirements that we know are on the horizon that are likely to occur in the next several fiscal years. And so the idea on this is, you know, a recommendation on funding, maybe we put a little more than what's owed, probably incremental, 25, maybe $30,000 in this fund this year, knowing that we're gonna have to pay out.
And this
22
covers
of it.
what again?
So this covers, it's basically sick leave buyback that has.
Why wouldn't we put a cap on it?
What's that?
Why wouldn't we put a cap on it? instead
So
of trying to figure out
there
how-
are caps in the union contracts and in the individual employment agreements that we have with department heads and in the personnel policies. These are within the caps.
They are.
Yes.
Considering their long-term employees are fairly
Some,
on the high end of compensated.
Or
and
not
accrue a lot
necessarily.
of sick days.
Yeah, yep,
These are expensive buybacks.
Yeah.
they are.
You anticipate that there will be some number of, more of that type in the next, I'll say, 5 years.
Yes.
That would make, a reserve fund where we can accumulate some money for that, for the future, worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think really establishing it this year, we would again just fund it incrementally above the amount needed, but then it would hopefully give us an opportunity when we didn't have a significant buyback amount owed in the next couple fiscal years, to then continue to be committed to budgeting some amount for that line item, so that when we do, have to pay out those amounts owed, that we'll have, it won't be the really wild swings, and a need to accommodate that within the operating budget.
Fairly neutral on that right now, but I understand it. And I think you answered the one question I had
Okay.
in terms of outturn.
Anything else from you, John?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
I'm thinking.
Okay. So that's a maybe.
Well, it's for me,
Mood of the
well, for me, that's a priority question.
Mhm.
It's relatively small funding.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it as, in the big picture, where is it as a priority? And also, I'm always looking at, when we get to town meeting, how easy is it to explain, and how much, I don't want to use the word political, but how much will is there in general to fund this type of thing? Spend money on this kind of thing. So that's what it is for me. It's not anything.
Yeah, and I'd
Kind of
say certainly of the articles we're going to be discussing tonight, the short-term need is probably less eminent than some of the others.
Yeah.
So as we go
That's the
through,
sense
yep.
I'm getting. Okay.
So the next one is looking to increase the Iron Rail Building Rental Revolving Fund spending limit. As we touched on, I think at the last meeting when we went through this list.
What is it now?
So this is the Iron Rail Rental Revolving Fund.
No, what
It's
is the-
25,000.
25,000.
Which is, I think you said, about what the debt payment's going to be.
Now that we're just
You've
issuing a
figured
ban
out, yeah.
for the projects down at the Iron Rail, we had thought there was gonna be about $7,000 or $8,000 of extra capacity if we bonded over a longer period of time. And that's since changed after we went to town meeting last spring. We heard back from our financial advisors for Southwest. And so the recommendation, and obviously talking to the Iron Rail Commission about this, they have some other smaller cost capital needs that they'd like to be able to address. And so while with the Municipal Modernization Act, we don't now have to go back to town meeting every year to reauthorize the revolving funds. If you need to increase it, that requires town meeting approval, so that's what we're looking to do for next year. And the one thing I will say is that the 2.5% escalation clauses that are in the lease agreements for the current tenants of the Iron Rail building actually just more than cover the $5,000 increase in the funding limit. So it has no net impact on our local receipts. They're not increasing by that
It's a net
amount,
wash.
but it's year over year, it's basically a wash.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So that's some value there in those new lease agreements that we've had put in place, and it will allow them again to address these smaller capital items. One of which we've talked about is the septic system.
And we've, I think, had many discussions about the need to keep up with the needs of maintenance, in particular, of the Iron Rail building.
Yes.
So this is one way to
Yep.
ensure that we're consistently, have a little bit of money to consistently.
I guess I would ask too that if they could project out 5 years at least as to what they see coming, because this may be a bit of a surge, is my guess, because there's been a lot of neglect, so there's pavement, there's septic, there's signage, et cetera. And by the way, the wall for the signage looks very, very
Big improvement
good.
for what
Yeah.
was
For
there.
those who have not driven
It's a
by
low bar,
the
but
entry
it is
to the iron rail
improvement.
property that the town of Wenham owns, it's improving significantly because there's gonna be signage out there, and we've had wall repair, and I think we're gonna continue that a little bit further.
Yeah.
So it's, I'm just so pleased, because that's a beautiful property, and,
Yeah, so just to be clear, the signage was paid for, actually, with.
last year's budget.
Yeah, well, there were
Yeah.
funds that were, set aside, into year one.
Yeah.
Into the revolving fund. And then basically the $25,000 will just cover 10 years of bonding for, the roof project, and the paving project, which are
Yeah.
the two major projects.
Yeah.
Really, the only other major thing out on the horizon, outside of HVAC, which is its own,
We can't even,
yeah, and we did the
comprehend at
feasibility
this point.
study and didn't come back with, much in the way of, potential grant opportunities, which was really what we were hoping for, from the state. It's really septic. That's the last major thing that they have to address
Well,
over the next 5
That's
years.
sort of my point. I don't, the roof, is it, I can't remember, is it complete replacement of roofing?
Yeah,
It is, okay, so that's probably 20 years.
yeah, and there's also some
Least.
brickwork that's gonna be done along with that project around the
Oh,
roof
okay,
line,
right,
chimney
right.
and so forth. There's some
Okay.
pointing, repointing and the like. So really, it's the paving and the roof. And that, the iron rail feels comfortable, all the conversations I've had with
Good.
them,
Good.
that's really their biggest needs.
Very pleased. It's a big revenue generator, and it's paying for its own expenses, so it's good.
Next one and final one before I hand it over to Margaret, is water discharge onto roads from private property. So this is something that's come up in the past. So sorry, let me give you a
Yeah, we have talked
number.
about this a little bit
Right
already.
now, Article 21. So this is something that's come up particularly of late, an issue that's been identified by several residents, by our public safety team, fire or police, DPW, have all raised it. So right now, the town already has a general bylaw about putting snow and ice under the road. We don't have anything about water, so the issue, one of the major issues with water is, the flash freezing black ice kind of situation. And so town council has put together, three different options for kind of strategically how we want to change it. They all would achieve the same end, which is basically making sure that we add this language into the bylaw, so we can either make an amendment to the existing bylaw, create a new bylaw, delete the existing, create a new bylaw that's relatively straightforward, or we can add a new bylaw that also speaks to specifically to sump pumps and whether those would drain onto public property, roadway, sidewalk, and so forth. So it's really a question of one, obviously, how much of a priority is this issue? Do we want to have it as an article relative to everything else? And then two, if we do, which iteration makes the most sense? And I don't know that I honestly have a strong recommendation on this, so I was looking for some feedback from the board.
so I think that we've talked about this before, and I think I may have said this before. I'm not it would be, I would need to hear from the DPW or whoever, that this is a priority, big, over other things, for me to judge whether it's a priority. My concern with this one is that I understand the risk and the need, and especially as it relates to sump pumps that have hoses coming out of them and are draining into the streets and potentially creating black ice in the winter. What I don't think we've addressed, what I think is omitted, is the fact that there are, I believe, some people in this community who have no other option. Like, what do we suggest if,
Thank you.
if they have a sump, if someone has a sump pump, because as we all know, wetlands, water table, et cetera, and they've have this in order to keep water out of their home, and it's being pumped out of their house, and it can't go in the street.
What are
and it
they supposed to
certainly
do
can't-
with it?
Right, it certainly can't go in the storm drains. What's the alternative that's acceptable to the town?
And I haven't gone too far down the rabbit hole in this particular issue, but I would be willing to bet that the new MS4 permit requirements are going to be going to make this issue even more prominent. I think they're going to say, I think they may well say they're illegal, they're illicit discharges.
Even
Period.
making it more important,
Yep.
to your point, to give people an option. It's interesting to me that you say that about the stormwater, because I'm guessing that water that comes out of a sump pump in someone's house is probably cleaner than the stuff that's running down the street into the storm drains. But that's not my bailiwick at all. My concern is, we know that this is an issue, that we know there are people who have this water that's coming out of their house that needs to go somewhere.
Yeah, they have a
Can't go in
basement
the storm
that's
drain.
taking in water.
It can't go in the street if we pass this bylaw. It's not going to absorb into their yard because they already have the problem of the water going into the house. So what are they to do? I would hate to pass a bylaw that leaves a population without, a relief.
And while you're thinking about that answer, let me just add to that, how big a problem is this as the eyes see it today? Is there one home? Are there 25 that have been identified? Is this a large problem, a small problem? Fortunately, both homes that I've owned in Wenham have not had water problems at all.
Yeah, and that was
I
Catherine asked
sympathize
us
with
to-
some
so we'll-
folks
We'll,
who've
we'll
had it.
ask specifically from DPW and police. I mean,
So that's-
I've had the conversations, I've got, a couple quick emails with them, but I will
Right.
ask them more specifically to give us
Yeah.
some level of detail.
That's,
Because I remember coming on the board, and I was here 2 weeks, and we had the Mother's Day floods, and man, let me tell you, it was not a pretty picture, the number of homes that we lost to water. I mean, their whole basements were chest deep or more in water. Now, that's more of an exception, that particular case, but it clearly identified for me that Wenham is a very wet, swampy area, and some of these homes that have been built 100, 150 years ago may not have realized how bad the problem was. And
Yep, I can get that additional
yeah,
information.
I can imagine a scenario where someone who feels like they have no other option is directing their hose to their neighbor's yard.
yeah, I'll put it in your basement, you put it in his
And
basement, you
so-
put it in.
And on and on. So, to my point, I think you got it.
No, it's not fun. The
No.
One time I did have a little water in my basement, was not because of flooding through the basement, it was because the grading outside was not proper. I fixed that problem, and I've never seen it again.
And I will say that I believe
But it was
that
very,
this town has done a pretty good job of anticipating areas where they know there's going to be
yeah.
a water problem,
Yeah.
and putting in storm drains that have easements that drain to acceptable places.
And we
So
fixed the
they-
culverts.
The town has, over the years, done things to mitigate the problem, but,
Yep.
anyway.
Okay.
Moving along, or we're going to be here all night. What do we got?
It's getting interesting.
It is interesting,
Oh, well,
it's just that we
just you
still-
wait.
Yeah, it gets more, it's gonna get more
With
interesting,
that
I
lead up.
think. So let's segue into more interesting? Is this Margaret's turn now?
This is Margaret's
Yeah,
turn,
do you,
yeah.
do you want me to discuss the MS4 piece?
Uh,
You know, the general bylaw amendment, was that the one
Yeah, so I
we
think
discussed
we'll
earlier?
just say that there is a new, Article 18, a new general bylaw is what we had originally thought we were gonna be talking about to MS4 stormwater compliance. That's required, under that permit. And since then, going back and forth with, legal counsel and with, our engineering consultants from Weston and Sampson, I think where we ended up is that we're proposing to make a minor amendment to one of the zoning bylaws, which Margaret will be touching on in a little bit, that will point to, rules and regulations, developed by the planning board that are very narrowly focused on pre and post-construction stormwater runoff in order to check that year 2 compliance box, and then come back next town meeting with a more comprehensive general bylaw that addresses stormwater. So that way we can make sure, as we go through the codification project in particular, that everything ties out. And again, we're, in the early stages of understanding exactly what's required, and I don't think we necessarily want to go too far down the road of meeting those compliance standards if we don't have to. So it also gives us a little bit of breathing room to see what else is found to be acceptable from other communities, so that we understand how far we have to go in terms of meeting the permitting requirements.
So to address what we know now is a requirement presently.
Correct, a bare minimum requirement.
Right, and way to broaden that until we have more certainty around
That,
what that's
Yeah.
going to
all
be.
right, yeah.
Yep, that's approximately
Yeah,
what we
that
discussed.
sounds like the right, it also sounds like a more manageable way.
And the planning board rules and regulations can be updated at a planning board public hearing. And after speaking with Weston and Sampson, they'll give us the language that's necessary for our year 1, year 2 compliance. And then, like Peter said, we can go further next year.
None of this is discretionary, so it's just a matter of where and how. and-
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Right.
Where and how we
Yeah,
address it.
this is not something that the town is taking
Yeah.
a leadership position on. It's just making
good.
sure that we aren't in a situation where, we could incur fines.
Sure.
Okay.
Good. So you should have a packet of information about our proposed zoning bylaw
The
amendment.
backup, I think, is probably helpful to go
back.
through.
Are we skipping enforcement of smoke-free workplace?
Yes.
Okay.
What are we skipping?
So there's,
There's it's
It's not
a
on.
new one, a different new one than, so where is the backup for, yeah,
right there.
right there, the one that says zoning bylaw amendments.
You got it.
Got it.
I'm just hoping that what I have in front of me matches your list in order.
Has no date other than to say
Says
January
January
2019.
Yeah, that's it.
2019.
Yep.
January's a pretty long month, though. I've taken to putting, date and time
Time
on
and
my
Yeah,
documents.
AM, PM.
absolutely appropriate. right.
Yeah, okay.
Just a background, just to let you know, between myself, Jackie as the permanent coordinator, and our building inspector, through the year when applications come in, or the planning board or the ZBA have to deal with certain issues, sometimes we find conflicts or issues arise in us trying to work through the bylaws, the zoning bylaws. And we'll jot down a note and say, we have an issue with that. So this has been going on probably all year. In the summer, we started to really sit down and list what things we thought would be important to bring forward this year. And that list was much bigger than what you have in front of you now. It's a big
Thank
list.
goodness for
It's a
that.
notebook full.
Really well
Yeah.
to start.
I'm sure.
And then I also then sat down with Margaret and Jackie and went through their
Yep.
first cut of the list, and it got a little
Little
smaller
yeah.
from there.
It may get a little
And,
smaller.
and then it went to the
Get
planning
kinda-
board, and it's gotten smaller from there. So
It's going in the right direction.
But it looks like, I know it's gonna look like a lot of potential, bylaw changes and amendments. But I think it's helpful to have that context, to know that this isn't the kitchen sink. This has been,
Wish list.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
The
Got it.
planning board has been working on these also the past couple of months. they've seen some drafts, they've discussed some of these. Their public hearing is scheduled for January 31st. The first one that we thought is 4.2 principal uses, and we wanted to add a new section, 4.2.6 use variances, to indicate just a simple line that says, am I on the right one?
Thought we were doing the definitions first.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's not in my, all right, I'll go back to definitions.
Section 2.2.
2.2?
Definitions?
Yep.
2.2.
Okay.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics.
So definitions kind of goes along with table of use regulations
Mhm.
also. So when we first started to look at definitions, one of the things that stood out to us was kennels. We've had discussions about it. There's no
Mhm.
definition of a kennel in our bylaw. In
Correct.
our current bylaw, it's a prohibited use in residential and in business zone. What we realized was the town clerk issues kennel licenses. The kennel licenses are based on the state guidelines around kennels for people who own more than one dog or who have more than one dog in their home. So what we're proposing is to come up with a definition for kennel, which we feel is a commercial kennel is what's prohibited, and it's under commercial, under our table of use regulations, so, but again, there's no real definition. So what we feel the town wants to prohibit is the commercial kennel, the traditional, cages and cages of dogs that people just bring in at night and board. So what we're looking at doing is coming up with a definition for a commercial kennel, and adding to our table of use regulations a category for animal daycare or training facility, which would be separate from a commercial kennel. That an animal daycare or training facility could be allowed by special permit from the zoning board of appeals.
Think Wag's Doggy Daycare.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's the first thing that's been on my mind
Right.
since you started the subject.
Right, I mean, so that's the idea, is that there would be differentiation between those
Yeah.
two uses, and there would be, commercial kennels would be prohibited, but you could
Exactly.
apply for a special permit for the daycare training
Dog
facility.
daycare.
So I have two questions, unless you had more on this, on that particular one.
No, the definition for the commercial kennel and the animal daycare training facility is in your packet.
Yeah, okay, so I have two questions around that.
Yeah.
I believe that there's a state statutory definition of a commercial kennel.
Ah,
And I'm wondering if there isn't some merit to having our,
take a look at what that is.
Did, and but the state's definition includes daycare, holding, training, so we wanted to separate those out.
so it could still, I agree with the separating out. And I think the distinction, well, let me back up. I agree with the separating out, but the part of the statute that speaks to what we would call a commercial kennel
Yeah.
in this, I feel like the wording should be as similar as possible to what the state would call what we're trying to call a commercial
And
kennel.
I think we've
Technically,
tried to,
that's what we
that's
did.
what
We
we've tried to
mimicked-
do.
Okay,
And town council has been involved already,
right,
recognizing the nuances that are there between the state statute, our bylaws.
right, because why would we make up a definition that is in conflict?
No, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
If-
We,
and I,
we took the state's definition and essentially separated out
Right.
daycare, training,
And I,
holding.
having sat through a few zoning board meetings where this was a topic of conversation, having a definition, I am totally in favor of. The distinction of an animal daycare or training facility, I understand as well.
Yeah.
It feels as though, in order to be as clear and definitive as possible, that it should include, the animal daycare or training facility should preclude an overnight stay. So this it doesn't say that.
It
Used
does
for
not.
holding, daycare, grooming, or training, but it doesn't say anything about overnight stays, which I feel like this is meant to not be an overnight stay, because if it were, it would kind of be a gray area between a training facility in which dogs perhaps, or animals perhaps stay overnight.
Yeah.
So
could
is
be.
that a commercial
training.
kennel or a training facility.
Well, in the, yeah,
If they're being trained.
the
for-
commercial kennel does explicitly say,
Oh, I'm good with the,
overnight-
the commercial
overnight
kennel.
stays, yeah.
I'm feeling like the gray area that presently exists
Yeah.
might continue to exist
Yeah.
if we don't add something to the animal daycare and training facility that says an establishment, I don't know the wording, but somehow says used for holding daycare, grooming, or training, but precludes overnight stays. So it's not a, it's a daycare, or it's a day training, or it's a day whatever, but it's not a training facility that
Could
keeps
keep a-
dogs overnight.
Dogs overnight in a training
In a,
program.
because, you know, as we know, that can be gray, and it's very hard to adjudicate when there are gray areas. But other than that, I think having the definition of both is a good idea. I don't know if commercial kennels are defined this way and prohibited under any circumstances in the town. I think it probably makes sense then that the town clerk would no longer have a fee for a commercial kennel, because there's under no circumstances allowed to be one. Am I correct?
Well, the state still wants you to maintain those fees. I'm not positive why we would need them, and if we do prohibit commercial kennels altogether, but there are personal kennels, you know, people who own 5 or 6 dogs, they need to be licensed and pay fees. Yeah,
The
we have to
fees I
look more
get,
into them.
what I think I'm concerned about is if I walked into the town clerk's office and said, and the town clerk wasn't completely up to date on our bylaws or
Yes,
new
right.
bylaws, and said, I want a commercial kennel license, I could probably get one.
They do that now.
Right, and.
Well, they have
what
been
do you-
doing that. I think it's, this issue is a little more front and center
Right, so
now
what
with
do
the
you,
clerk's
you know,
office.
what does the town clerk do if someone comes, what I think they would do is say, well, we have to have this fee on our list, however, those are not allowed in town, so therefore I cannot issue you a commercial license.
And town council
Fee.
has recommended that we update the general bylaw, which includes the fees for licensing of kennels and animals, that to indicate that it also has to adhere to current zoning bylaws. Just a blurb that says,
Right.
you know, you're coming in for a commercial kennel or a personal kennel, whatever kind of kennel, you need to make sure you look at the bylaws and that you're adhering to them that way.
And we
Okay.
quite honestly thought that we would make that change next year as part of the codification, in the interest
Yeah.
of not adding another warrant article to amend the general bylaw.
Doesn't- yeah,
Just,
Right.
just to
Yeah.
do that one.
Well, and I agree with that in general. The case, you know, I think one of the cases that may have been made clearer, the decision might have been clearer if this had already been in existence, has already been adjudicated. And unless we anticipate a new one coming up, to wait is not
Yeah.
the issue, but I
Yep.
highly support the clarity.
Yes, clarity.
Some of these things are nice, but not truly applicable.
Well, this one is.
This one is.
It
Well,
is.
and I think Margaret mentioned it. This list has been driven by issues that have come up, applications, projects that have come before
Sorry, I missed that
any
point.
of the land use boards that we've said, our bylaws could be a lot better, more clear, less inconsistent.
Yep.
And that's where these are coming from.
Oh, okay.
So it's clearly something that we need. It's a question of,
I think it is.
is it something that we should do now or as part of the codification? And I
Or study
reserve
further.
judgment.
Yeah,
We
and
gotta
just-
put it somewhere.
And just
Yeah.
point of clarification, what I was suggesting to wait for codification was the change to the general bylaw
Right.
Oh.
that got rid of the reference to those commercial kennel fees, or not got rid of the reference, but made it clear that they had to also, any kennels had to be in compliance with the zoning bylaws.
But by not doing that, does that presume that they don't have to be in compliance?
No,
It's
exactly.
just
That's
not,
why
doesn't
I was saying.
clarify that they do have to be.
Correct.
Okay,
It's
gotcha.
just a little.
That was a belt and
reminder.
suspenders,
Gotcha.
kind of, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Got it, thank you.
Exactly. So also under definitions, after the kennel piece, one of our definition for lot, says an area of land in common ownership meeting minimum requirements for area width and frontage in the district in which it lies. A lot is buildable. That's what our zoning bylaw currently states, and I was unclear as to why that language was there. In my experience, there's no indication that a lot is buildable unless you're told it's buildable by the building inspector and that it conforms to all zoning requirements. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why a lot would not be buildable.
And still be a lot.
And still be a
And
lot.
still
It
be
basically
owned.
says all lots are buildable,
Right.
which is not
Yeah.
the case.
Yeah.
And so it
Got it.
makes it confusing, you know, if you're a resident trying to go through an application process or considering a,
Right, and
they
I
say,
think-
well, no, it says a lot's buildable.
By removing it, we're not saying any lot is not buildable, we're not saying any lot is buildable, we're just not speaking to it, so. I'm not sure why that language was put in there, I don't have that information.
Start singing the tradition song again. Do you have any comment on this one?
No.
Okay, got it. That
Um,
seems fairly straightforward.
Okay, the other one is our current language, special permit, the definition of special permit, says a permit granted by the Board of Appeals for structure or use identified in table of use regulations as permitted with approval of the Board of Appeals. Yeah, our bylaw, the planning board also, issues special permits.
Right.
And we realize they're not mentioned in here, so what we wanna do is just change it to special permit granting authority. That covers anyone who issues special permits. It doesn't specify, because the Board of Appeals and the planning board both issue them.
Special permit.
Not sure why they were
Special
forgotten
permit for the structure.
in the original iteration.
It's, even with that change, which
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yep.
I guess I'm not, it sounds like it says that a permit granted by a granting authority for a structure is identified in the table.
Mhm.
Oh, I see. So the table needs to be approved by the special granting authority, not necessarily the planning board or zoning
Well-
board, but either.
Yeah, the table
Allowing
of
for either.
use,
Yeah.
can require the planning board also to issue special permits.
Right.
So we just, it's really just to have a general language so people don't get confused and say, I have to have a special permit.
So far be it from me to suggest any,
Sorry.
far be it from me to suggest language, because I know how this goes. But I did not, in reading that with the amendment, it wasn't particularly clear to me. So I just am gonna,
If we're gonna change the definition, we wanna make sure that the
just
new
the,
definition is
is clear. I'm not sure why it's important to even have that in there. I'm sure it is, it's just not
Yeah.
clear, so maybe someone couldn't.
There are areas in the zoning bylaw that grant the planning board the authority to issue special permits.
Right.
So we just don't want someone to read the definition of special permit, which is in the definitions, to think that only the Board of Appeals can issue a special permit in Wenham. Even though the table of use regulations lists the BA as the Board of Appeals,
Right.
but it also lists the planning board in the table of use regulations as that
Special
authority
permit.
able to issue a special
So
permit.
I guess where I'm coming from is, why wouldn't this say, again, I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting language, but that both the, as identified in the table of use regulations, both the zoning board of appeals and the planning board have special permit granting authority? I mean, isn't that what you're trying to say?
That's what we're saying. Yep, it is. We're
That feels
saying that.
clearer to me.
Okay.
But that's not, that's just my comment.
I don't know that there's a scenario where a Board of Selectmen may be able to issue a special permit.
God forbid.
We just felt that was kind of covered for anyone
Okay.
who's allowed to issue them. But again, we could look at it and change it to say zoning board of appeals or planning board, as indicated in the table of use regulations.
I don't feel strongly about it, it just doesn't seem to.
Just
the
sounds
intent is not
funny.
as clearly
Yeah.
made.
S-
Okay.
SPGA, Special Permit Granting Authority, is kind of a generic term.
And it's
So-
something that's used in other municipalities as well.
Absolutely, it's
Right.
used
Okay,
all throughout.
okay.
If I might ask how much more that you have, because we've got the executive session still.
We've got
Um,
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. And a couple of pertinent ones, but not necessarily simple ones.
Yep.
So
Wanna do
let's,
4.2?
Yep.
Principal uses.
4.2 is one of those that if it doesn't get put in this year, it's not imperative, but what we found was in section 13.2.2.4, there is a line that states the zoning board of appeal cannot grant use variances. It's something the town would have adopted. So the use, all we wanted to do was bring it out up to the front of the book a little bit so that anyone who's going through the zoning bylaws sees that right off the bat in the table of use regulations. So they know the zoning board of appeals is not gonna issue a use variance.
okay,
And again, something that's come up on a number of
Yeah.
occasions.
right.
It's just a clarification or a, what do you call it, belt and suspenders?
So I guess that is under the for me anyway, under the category, to whoever's judgment is making this, is this something that we expect to be a problem in the next year, or could it be part of the next year's codification?
No.
Which we better not have any budget things to talk about next year, because we got a lot of codification stuff.
Or special town meeting.
This is not imperative.
Just saying.
We're already covered because it is mentioned in the bylaw that we don't issue use
Right.
variances. It was, again, we just wanted to bring it
Okay.
up a little higher.
Do you have anything on that one, John? Do you have anything to add to that one?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so the section 4.0, the table of use regulations, we
Yeah.
went over that.
Touched
Yeah.
on that.
The next one is section 4.3.6.3, the parking and storage of commercial or recreational vehicles. We've gone over this one several times. The zoning board of appeals recently had a case where they were asked to issue a special permit under this section for 2 additional commercial vehicles that were less than 25,000 GVW. And when they looked at this bylaw, they said, well, we can't issue that. We can only issue a permit for 2 vehicles over 25,000 GVW. And when we thought about it, we said, that's huge. I mean,
Yeah, that's a very
25,000
big
GVW,
Well,
up to 26,000 is like a
GVW
garbage
doesn't
truck.
dictate the size of the vehicle.
Concrete
It
truck,
only,
yeah.
it only dictates the weight of the vehicle plus
Right.
load.
Yeah.
Well, it's a heavy-duty vehicle. It's just big.
Well, it
It's
is.
a-
I
it's
know.
a-
I thought it was,
Did
yeah,
I-
it's a heavy-duty vehicle. It's more like a garbage truck or dump truck.
Yeah.
Something that big. So we weren't sure what the rationale was behind this, so after discussion with planning board, ZBA, we feel that it may have just been a typo, and that the storage of up to 2 additional commercial vehicles of not more than 25,000 GVW, rather than of more than 25,000 GVW, could be allowed by
I see
special
what you're saying.
permit. So that's what we're recommending the change be at this point. There's more discussion that could be had on this and what the town's intent was when it was, first written. What do we want to allow for commercial vehicles in people's property?
Right.
Where, so we weren't clear, but we did want to just bring it to the attention of the selectmen, planning board, and ZBA. Say
I
we're
thought
not-
generally commercial vehicles were not allowed in residential properties.
You can park 1 commercial vehicle or recreational vehicle, not more than 25,000 GVW. That's permitted by right.
Okay.
If you want more than that, you go to the ZBA
Hmm.
for a special permit. But again, the special permit under this, could only issue them for the great big trucks.
And so if I wanted more than one vehicle below that 25,000 right now,
Yeah.
there's nothing that
no way
says
to
I
do it.
can or can't do it.
Seek a special permit for a commercial vehicle that was a pickup truck and a commercial vehicle that's a dump truck, but you couldn't do 2 commercial pickup trucks. Is it an example?
Well, you can have a commercial pickup truck.
And a commercial, and you could seek a special permit for the
For-
dump truck.
Yeah.
But you couldn't get the
Yeah.
commercial pickup and then seek a special permit for a
Yeah.
second commercial pickup.
So
which
again,
is more likely for a
clarity.
small business owner to have.
Yeah. Clarity.
That was something the building
Sure.
inspector wanted to bring to the table. He was very
Well,
he
this
had
is
a
a
lot of
difficult
opinions about this passage.
Yeah, I'm sure,
Well,
coming
I'm
from
sure-
Beverly, there's a lot of commercial,
And wanting to be mindful of Wenham, and
Mhm.
did Wenham want to permit dump trucks? This is
Right.
a section of the bylaw
Right.
even before
Hmm.
we had our current
Or
building
larger.
inspector that we dealt with the former building inspector that people,
Yeah.
it's a easily misread section of the bylaw.
They, you know, it could go up, there's no top number, it's from 25,000 and up.
Plus,
Right.
So you could bring an 18-wheeler to the board and say, can I park 2 of these in my yard?
there's no maximum.
Well, that's what I was starting to refer to when I said weight. It's not, that's a weight figure, not a size.
Yeah.
Because you got a
Exactly.
50, you got a 53-foot
Yeah.
box
Yeah.
behind a 30-foot tractor, sleepover tractor. You get almost 100
Well, and
feet
it's,
of,
it's unclear to me also where these numbers came from.
yeah.
Why they use GVW and not class of truck or some other classification.
I don't
So
know.
I understand the concern and the building inspector's desire for clarity so that he knows what he's enforcing and can do that clearly. I feel like this might be a slightly bigger issue for the town.
Yeah.
It presently exists, but is it something that we want really to even allow by special permit?
Mhm. Well, that's
On what
exact-
side, you know,
That did come up,
does it vary
yeah.
by where you are, or whether you have a business, or
Well, and
how
that's
big your
why it
lot
would
is,
be
or-
by special permit only, and it would only be up to 2.
But you
Up to
know,
2.
frankly, in some situations, and I'm sure the, you know, permitting authority would take this into account, but you'd have one by right, and you could get a special permit for 2 more. 3 commercial vehicles, even up to 25,000, might create some tension between
yeah.
neighbors, and yet it's allowable by the ZBA, but may not be what the town in general would like to see.
And then the ZBA has the authority to determine that, to say this doesn't fit in this neighborhood, you
Right.
can't put all these trucks
That's
here.
also a very difficult one too,
Difficult
because
one.
it's not clear.
Yes,
This, you know, the way this is written, if they have full discretion,
yeah,
but,
yeah,
Well, and I think it's a difficult issue too, in that, you know, depending on the size of the lot
Mhm.
alone can be, you know, somebody that has a huge tree line and can't see any neighbors 200 feet all around
Right.
versus a more tightly,
yeah, tight neighborhood.
right,
tightly laid out neighborhood.
right.
can
And
be
then there's a
difficult.
fairness standard. So that's why I'm saying it's, you know, just because I have a bigger lot or a smaller lot, why can't I blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm just
Okay.
sense that this is more than just
It's, yeah, it's, again, it's one of those ones
clarifying that
came
one
up
thing.
And we went, we
Yeah.
don't understand this one, so.
Okay, reserving my right on
Okay.
that
A
one too.
lot of varieties of trucks.
We
Yeah.
know- And I actually have a list of, and I gave you a couple of photos in your.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are a lot of varieties of
And-
trucks.
I see them every day, I
even
deal with
the-
them all the time,
Yeah,
so I,
even it has to be away from, you know, not visible from the street, and all of that is a little bit hard to define, not visible from any public way.
We do have that currently in the bylaw.
I know we do, and
As a
it's
requirement. and-
I don't think it's easily enforced even now.
No,
So-
and you know, to be honest, my opinion is that entire section, parking and storage, commercial vehicles, recreational vehicles, it's different, because there's motor vehicles, and then there's unregistered vehicles, there's, trailers, boats. So all those, maybe the whole thing should be looked at a little closer.
It feels that way to me based on what I've seen
All
anyway.
right.
there's a lot of work in that.
Peter, what one do you want to go to next?
Site plan review?
Yes, okay,
Okay.
section 13.
That's a good one.
Site plan review applicability. This came up because we wanted some definitive guidelines as to who needs to go for site plan review,
Mhm,
regardless if you need a special permit or not.
mhm.
And what we've determined is to amend the language to say any change of use from residential, including single-family, to a municipal institutional, commercial, or industrial use needs to go to the planning board for site plan review. Then the next part of that is to renumber some of the sections.
Mhm.
And then section 3 of that was to add a clause that says drainage calculations by a registered professional engineer. So one of the requirements of site plan review is that they, currently, storm drain design must conform to the town's subdivision rules and regulations. We want to add language that says, and to the town of Wenham's stormwater management bylaw, which is, there is a stormwater management bylaw in place now. We want to make sure we reference that. But then we're also going to add a new section that says, and to the planning board rules and regulations concerning stormwater. That's the one that we spoke about earlier. We'll propose to update the planning board's rules and regulations that require the adherence to the MS4 permitting guidelines, which are currently, we're just gonna add the construction requirements
Right.
and
So
post-construction.
you're just gonna mirror that in?
Yeah, so we're gonna put that in the planning board rules and regulations, hopefully through a public hearing with the planning board.
Mhm.
And then we would amend this section of the zoning bylaw, site plan review, to refer back to that to the planning board rules and regulations, along with the subdivision rules and regulations and the stormwater management bylaw.
I think, in particular, the change of use clarification is one that we have seen and will continue to see. There seems to be I could see on the horizon some changes of use and some questions. So to clarify that in particular.
And I think, talking to Margaret before tonight, in terms of prioritization of these zoning bylaw changes, I think this one's top of the list,
The site plan review one?
site plan review. And it also, frankly, is the one that we need to change in order to comply with the MS4 permit. So it will have to be a warrant article.
Mhm.
And so if it's already a warrant article, we wanted to make sure that the language that's included in it, the amendments that are made, are
Gets
consistent with the,
corrected, yeah.
Sure.
correcting those issues that have been identified.
Sure. Yep, makes sense.
Okay?
And I'm going to use a little discretion on this one. The next one is a pretty substantial rewrite of our existing zoning bylaw relative to signs, as
That's a
we've
fair
long talked
statement.
about.
Yes.
That is a fair statement.
And my sense from Margaret is that this is less of a concern with the land use boards, with the ZBA and planning board. This is really more a Board of Selectmen policy
Thank you. Yes.
issue.
Yep.
And so in the interest of the agenda and trying to move things along, I just ask that the board take a good look at what is proposed, what's new and different. There are a couple other changes that will likely happen that we're gonna be getting back to town council on, from what's here to what we ultimately are gonna take up and at least discuss. But if you could just take a look through what's on paper here, give us your feedback, questions, concerns, so that we can probably take this up in earnest on February 12th.
Okay, and to that end, I'll just throw out the one question that I think I have, without any discussion necessarily. I didn't feel, or I didn't see where it was well-defined. In here, it talks about, can only be here or here, not on public land, but we don't define what public land is. So all those,
Yep.
we talk about strips, and so I'm not saying we need,
So chapter 255-7.4, general standards for signs.
yep,
There's A through I.
mm-hmm,
Under I, that last phrase, no non-municipal sign shall be located on public property, including sidewalks, roadsides, and roadways. That language is going to be revised.
Okay.
And will also include a reference to new Board of Selectmen rules and regulations around non-municipal signs on public property.
Okay.
That then allows the board to have some discretion to do what we've long been talking about, which is
Designate.
potentially designate some area and set up some, size limitations, number limitations, time limitations, what we can and cannot prohibit, in terms of, what's actually on the signs, what they're promoting and so forth. So that's,
So that is the section I would have referred to, and I still will continue to have the question of
Yes.
a definition for roadsides
Yep.
and roadways.
Yep.
What is that exactly? Because that's where we
Okay.
are. So, that's all. I'm perfectly happy to defer the rest of the.
Everybody knows what a roadway is.
Well, the
Catherine?
you
road,
do until you don't,
you
and
do
then it
until
becomes
you
an
don't.
issue.
Until you have to define it.
Yeah, it's 10 feet from the central, we could get
Add
into it.
that to definitions in the
That's,
beginning of the bylaw?
Potentially,
Yeah.
Maybe.
we'd have to work with town council on that.
that's
yeah.
the number one question when someone, on signs that are permissible presently on property, on an individual's property.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
This is the question I hear most. Well, you say it
What
can't
does
be
that
on
mean?
the roadway, or it can't be on the
Right.
roadside, and if I don't have a sidewalk, but I have a grass strip. So clarifying that, I think, will just diminish the number of questions that we get about it.
And then the last one, solar.
Oh,
So solar has come up, just, we do not have any pending projects other than Gordon College did come in for a ground-mounted solar. They did not have to conform to site plan review because they didn't meet the threshold for kilowatts under our current bylaw. They met the threshold for area, the 20 acres. Our bylaw currently is for just large scale, ground mounted. And that was because we're a green community, we have to have that, and we have to allow solar, by right in certain districts, which we created, this 20-acre parcel district. Expedited permitting, we can do site plan review, but they need to get their permits within a year. So those are some of the requirements that were met under our current zoning bylaw. for
So
the
you're
Green
talking
Communities Act.
strictly about ground mounted?
Ground mounted, yes. We
Not
don't
roof. Not
regulate
roof.
roof.
Okay.
Right, we won't regulate roof mounted. So what we started to talk about was, there have been, of course, everyone recalls the Beverly case, where
Yes.
someone put the big ground mounted solar in somebody's, right in someone's
Yeah.
backyard.
Yeah,
And
recall that.
so we wanted to start to think about that
I was
again.
gonna say, you ought to look at Beverly. They've been through a lot. I've been
Yeah.
through some with Beverly.
Yeah.
On
And
our
we-
own property.
We have not, again, we don't have any applications for any, no one has come in saying that they're considering it even. In Wenham, we do have several roof-mounted ones, people have a big enough
Yeah.
house
Right,
to.
and that's typically
include
on
that. That's
residential
typically-
communities.
Yeah, more economically feasible, I think,
Mm.
for homeowners. But we're seeing them happen, and the ground-mounted are becoming cheaper and, more
I assume we
efficient,
also
so.
have permitting, permitting costing for solar projects? Or don't we? If you want to put a solar project on your home or building, do we have
A
permitting
fee
process?
schedule
A fee
for
schedule for a
electrical,
building
you're talking
permit?
about electrical inspections?
For the building
specifically?
permit?
Yeah,
and-
yes.
We have a solar roof array requires a building permit and an electrical permit,
Yeah.
both of which fall under the regular fee schedule, 5 per thousand for building and 3 per thousand for electrical based on the cost of the total project, labor, materials for both permits.
Yeah.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah.
Because I had to get the city of Beverly to correct theirs. They were way overcharging for what we were gonna be doing, and I was more than shocked by the numbers. And the mayor said, yeah, I think we got a problem there. Okay,
Well, what we've proposed is two separate sections. One for small-scale ground-mounted, and I've used the state's guidelines. The state does have model solar bylaws, as well as other communities, and got some input from other planners. What we've defined a small-scale ground-mounted solar as a system that occupies 1,750 square feet or less of surface area. That's approximately the size of an in-ground pool plus the apron.
Pretty big.
It's pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing we do is say, well, how far do we want our setbacks to be? And this is the section that we're not sure how far we can go with the setbacks. So we're recommending 30 feet for rear, side, and 40 feet for front.
Of the lot?
Yes,
That it's on,
from,
okay.
from the setbacks from the lot line for the small. Once you get over that, between that and the large scale, which is, so the medium is from anything 20, more than 1,750 square feet, but less than 40,000 square feet. So you could have a solar array of
40,000 is big.
square feet, which is an acre almost of land covered with these. And right now, we don't regulate those. We could, and we're not gonna get inundated with applications,
That's
I don't
good.
believe, but.
But right now, we
right
have
now.
nothing on the books, so we couldn't have any minimum setback.
Oh, again, you're still talking about ground
And
mount.
so, but
Ground-mounted, absolutely.
the setbacks that are in here, you feel are the maximum setbacks that we
That's-
can
Yeah,
legally?
that's what we need to confirm.
Yeah.
We have
We
not
actually think
confirmed
they're
it.
on the high side of,
Because, think about
Yeah.
a 1 acre lot
Mhm.
With a,
that size, ground mounted solar unit, 100 feet is,
right, well, our,
pretty big and pretty,
That's about the size what I was going to be doing on our building,
commercial building.
but it was all
Right, but, you
second
know,
story
that's
high, but not
that's a very
ground.
big structure.
It is.
It is
yeah.
a
It's a lot of square footage.
Allowable on, by right, on most lots.
and I don't
Any-
believe we
Already.
can regulate the size of the lot. We can't prohibit solar
oh,
on a particular size lot. We can't prohibit solar at all, nor do we want to. But I believe the medium, we went to 100 feet. Our large scale is 300 feet, so we kind of kept it lower than that. Large scale, our current bylaw does not have a size of the arrays. It doesn't determine size, it's only kilowatts. The large scale does have to be on 20,000 acres, not 20,000, 20 acres.
Kind of like 20,000.
More.
rather.
A 20-acre parcel. So we're just trying to kind of fill that hole where we can't, we're not regulating these ground-mounted in smaller or medium sizes. This needs to also go by town council, who will let us know what those setbacks mean and if they're allowable.
Yeah.
So this is saying that
Go
if,
further.
whatever size, ground-mounted
Mhm.
installation meets those setbacks, they're allowed by right.
For the small scale. For the small scale. Medium scale, they would need site plan review. We're currently not proposing any special permits. I don't believe that we can require a special permit for it. We
Really?
can only do site plan review and say, you have to adhere to this setbacks. There's only certain things we can regulate on solar.
So I'll just make a general, my general philosophical statement, that if we are going to regulate these, we should regulate them to the maximum extent possible.
Okay.
I think there's a huge potential for issues with
Yep.
these. And yes, it makes sense to have some regulations rather than just allowing anything, anywhere, anytime.
Exactly,
But-
sure.
That's my
Um,
general comment
So,
on
and in terms of urgency,
that.
again, we don't have applications in front of us, we haven't heard from
They're
anyone
not knocking down the doors.
proposing, but once we get one, it could become an issue if we don't have.
yeah, I think the issue here
something in
is,
place.
you raise it as an issue, we don't do anything on it, an application comes up,
Right.
2 months from now, and we say, well, it wasn't an issue, so we didn't act on it,
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden
Yeah.
it is an issue.
But
Yeah.
it's all, for me,
Mm.
balanced with the amount of time that this kind of a bylaw will take up in a town meeting.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
is it
Yeah.
proportional to the
To the meeting structure
to the meeting
itself.
structure and imminent need or risk, I
Yeah.
guess, would put it, so.
Because our primary function is to not just do the town business, but do the town business particular to the budget and expense.
Yeah, certainly, no, I understand that.
Yeah,
But these other things do need to be tended to.
Mm-hmm.
right. And although, to your point, I think you made earlier, Peter, although I have a very strong opinion about not having special town meetings that have any kind of financial or budgetary articles, to have, if we have something substantial in the way of bylaw changes,
Yeah,
a special town meeting that's
do a
restricted
whole-
only to
To the-
bylaw and I don't mean fee kind of, but non-financial, non-budgetary, might be the way to go with this, so people understand what they're going in for, and there's a little more time to address them rather than sticking them at the end of a meeting or omitting some that we wish we didn't because we've got, this huge budget discussion.
Yeah, and I think certainly with the codification project in particular, we've spent however long tonight on a half dozen or
Right.
so
Right.
zoning bylaw changes. There are
Oh my gosh.
a lot more of these through the codification project, not all of which, involve this level of nuance and policy
Mm-hmm.
direction, but that are substantive, that
Mhm.
I think frankly, there's no way that they could possibly be addressed through the annual town meeting
Right.
process that Wenham residents expect,
You're gonna lose,
Which
you're gonna
is-
lose them.
which is a Saturday afternoon,
Yep.
start to finish.
And we learned last year not to
Well, I know-
overload the
I'm sorry.
budget, I'm sorry, the
No, I know that we have
agenda.
the same quorum for both the special town meeting and a regular town meeting. It makes it a little bit more comfortable to think that we're gonna get at least the same minimum level of representation. And since the selectmen have the authority of what to put on the warrant or not, I think we could, from a policy point of view, say
Okay.
non-financial. So let's, I guess, think about these in that,
Yeah.
in that context as well. I don't know when you think the codification work will be ready for prime time. But, So-
I think certainly by next spring, the question is whether it'd be ready for this coming fall.
right, that was my question, that was
Yeah.
actually what I meant to say.
Yeah, and we,
If it's, when's the earliest it could be ready if we were going to consider it in a special?
I
Okay,
think a special would motivate those of us involved. The opportunity for one. would be
We're already
motivating
motivated,
factor.
aren't we? We're very motivated.
you guys would have to be motivated to spend this much time on this kind of detail. Requires a certain kind of.
amplify
It's
that
kind of
by,
their life up there.
Times,
20
right.
to talk
There
about
has
the
to-
codification project,
yeah.
at least.
So-
Stay excited to talk codification. If it's not fun,
Yeah, right. So, and it doesn't mean that it's not important.
Ice cream
It
for
just
everybody
means
after the
in our
conversation.
form of government, where have to appeal to the, I won't say masses, because we don't really have masses, but to the public, there's a balance between what we can reasonably expect to get their attention and make rational decisions on. So,
I just wanted to clarify something. The planning board public hearing for the zoning amendments was scheduled for January 31st.
right.
But due to an error in the posting,
Oh.
they're going to open their meeting on the 31st, and I believe continue that hearing to the following week. And I have yet to determine whether it's gonna be Wednesday, the 6th, which I'm gonna push for, or Thursday. Well, I can't do Thursday, the 7th, but,
Thursday's a ZBA
yeah.
meeting,
I
right?
believe they'll be able to do Wednesday, the 6th.
Which may or may not be a finance committee meeting. Okay, that's up to you guys.
That'll be the joint finance committee meeting with, two towns on library recreation, inspectional services and so
it's
forth.
Not
Yeah.
likely to be here though.
Well, that joint meeting's always at the Bucher.
Right.
Yeah.
That'll
there's
be
not
at
a
the
conflict.
Bucher.
So, okay, I'm gonna make note of that, because I made note to it. I'd be interested to attend on the 31st. So I will make note of the fact that that's probably gonna change and watch for it.
Could I ask when the selectmen anticipate making decisions about the articles? I know you've got, I'm not asking for a date, but I'll be submitting all of these to the planning board for their discussion.
I think the idea would be we'd get feedback from that planning board hearing,
Okay.
and from the planning
And
board
so I would
generally.
ask them.
And then the
Because-
next selectmen's meeting where we'll be taking up warrant articles generally would be the 12th, but that,
Okay.
I think, is gonna be focused on the ones that we haven't touched on yet.
Right.
And then we would,
Well, since we closed the warrant at our meeting following the 12th, on the 26th,
oh, that's what we're scheduled for right now.
Okay.
well, and I think that's gonna be really important
Yep.
to be able to, so I think we should, so the 12th, or maybe, yeah.
So the
I'll
12th
have
is the
the
earliest. I
12th.
think a recommendation back from the planning board in terms of what's most pressing for them, in
Okay.
terms of priority would be helpful.
Okay,
'cause if
well,
we-
I'll address that with them at their
Thank you.
hearing.
Thank you so much for hanging out,
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you for,
because if we push back the
Having me.
closing of the warrant too much longer, we're gonna be interfering with the printing of the warrant, and,
We don't want to do that.
no. Don't, we
Oh,
don't
come
wanna do that,
on.
do we?
On our award-winning
Right.
Word documents.
Right, so I think we have to push ourselves to,
Okay.
Panic starting to form in my eyes.
yeah.
Jackie's getting nervous.
All right, let's see, I guess I'm supposed to do something now, I got lulled into
Yeah, yeah.
So, again, thank you guys for the information.
Thank you.
It's very, very helpful,
And I'll follow up on those other issues that we
Okay.
discussed.
great.
What
So,
you have to do is an executive session.
yes,
y-
and
Young lady.
so we, why am I having to think about this?
I don't know,
We are
it's in your
going
book.
to adjourn from open session?
No, we're just gonna,
Just gonna
Just
move
to go
into-
into executive
And
session.
not to
And
re-
not to
not-
return
not
to
to return
open
to
session.
open
Yeah, that
session.
part I got.
that's
Okay, so we've completed our open session items on our agenda.
So all of you are going to have to leave in a minute.
So, yeah.